Hi everyone, this is Haoxuan Xu, and the topic for this time is analysis on census factor that contribute to different income levels with supervised and unsupervised learning. We're going to start with some background, and the United States has long been touted as one of the capitals of the free world, where ordinary people from working classes or lower socioeconomic background can achieve the American dream, where they would become members of the middle class with houses and picket fences. The dream of moving yourself up by the bootstrap has defined generations of American psyche and is seen as an indispensable part of the free world and the capitalist society. This image of self-reliance and meritocracy has come under increasing scrutiny, however. After World War II and decades of booms in the 50s and 60s, income inequality started growing as wealth gaps started expanding between the wealthy and the working class. During the Reagan presidency of the 80s, more tax cuts policies were pushed out that further exacerbated the wealth gap between the rich and the poor. And it is so against this backdrop that it is worthwhile to re-examine the income level of people in different socioeconomic groups, as well as different occupational sectors, and to evaluate qualities and attributes that contribute more to someone's income level. Having sifted through those qualities, we'll have a better idea on whether those qualities reflect the motif of individualism and self-reliance. So the data sources we're using for this study here is the census income data set from the UCI machine learning repository. It was collected and built in 1994. There are 14 variables ranging from age, sex, marriage status to occupational sectors, and a Boolean target variable indicating if the individual makes more than $50K or less than $50K. There are 48,842 rows of data points from this data set. This is a brief overview of all the fields that are available in the data sets. You see that there are individual level attributes such as age, work class, education levels, marital status, occupation, relationship, race, sex, hours per work in native countries. And the target variable here is the income level, and which is a Boolean variable indicating if someone's above 50K or below 50K. So upon observing this data, it was noticed that there are a few columns that has significant data imbalance issues. An example of this would be native country, work class, and race. For native country, it was apparent that majority of data points here were people who are from United States. There are very few number of non-US individuals so in this data set. As for the work class, which in this case refers more to the occupational sector, large majority of the respondents were in the private sector. And for race, most of the respondents were of white race. To address this issue, I limited the native country to the United States, race to white, and work class to private sector to address the data imbalance issue and to limit of the scope of this study. There are also some other pre-processing steps that were taken. I limited the educational level to high school grad, some college, and bachelor's, as these were the most common educational attributes of individuals in the data sets. There are quite a few other values for the educational level, but most of them have very few data points, and it is better to limit the scope of this field so as to potentially avoid or mitigate the curse of dimensionality issues. For the unsupervised learning, we'll first start doing some clustering analysis to get a rough look at the data to see if there are distinct clusters within those individual attributes. So for this case, I used agglomerative clustering with a cluster of 3 linkage word, and this is a dendrogram that are resulted from performing the agglomerative clustering. While there are some clusters involved, when you go down over there, the levels, it seems that the clustering wasn't as distinct. This is the actual, the clustering with the PCA involved while I performed principal component analysis against all the 14 variables involved, and to to sift them through and then come up with the clustering. It seems that even with the clustering here, it doesn't seem like there were distinct clusters involved in this process. It could be that because it could be the limited scope of our data, the fact that we are limiting the educational level to only high school, college, some college and college grads, as well as the occupational sector and the race level. It could be due to that, but it seems that from the clustering, there's not a lot of a very distinct cluster among the data points. So for supervised learning analysis, which will be the bulk of the SNAT analysis, we're using random forest to perform supervised learning. It is preferred over some more other linear supervised learning algorithm because it potentially mitigates the curse of dimensionality issues. And since our data set wasn't very large, and also since that it got even smaller after we limited some of the scope of the fields, it is better to rely on a nonlinear supervised learning algorithm. Also, one feature that's very helpful from the random forest algorithm is that it allows you to find out the best performing features among all those variables, and to potentially give you a better idea of what are some of the features that are most important in contributing to a higher income level. And those are the ones that are very helpful. So after the supervised learning algorithms, you can see that we have an accuracy of we have a precision of 87% for false, 57% for true, recall 89% for false, 52% for true, an F1 score of 88, 0.88, and for false rather than 0.54 for true. With accuracy, the F1 score is 0.81. That's okay. It's not the highest, but I think it's performing up to the level. And if you were to look into the features, the most important features over here, you can see that very quickly, age is the most dominant feature in the entire features, which makes in a sort of way it makes sense, but the fact it's still pretty shocking, the fact that it takes upon such a large importance compared to all the other feature variables. That seems to be also an interesting fact. The second most important features among all are hours per week. That makes sense. That means that the more hours you work per week, the more likely you're going to have higher income levels than those who work less hours. And an interesting third variable that are also contributing the most is the marital status. And it is particularly for those who are never married. Now, you can kind of correlate, you can kind of see some relationship perhaps between the hours per week and marital status. And especially for me, for those people who maybe work in the software space or technology companies, you can often, or maybe even that, or maybe even in the financial sector, then very often you can be working long hours per week, and that majority of those people who are able to take those hours, or usually young people who never married, those are people who are recent college grads, and they have to grind a couple of years in those big companies to build their resume, build their experiences. That kind of makes sense. But the age factor is the one that seems to also suggest that there's still a lot of seniorities involved when it comes to someone's income level. It's not exactly purely meritocracy as well as not purely the amount of effort one brings to the job. Yes, and some of the other features, sex, it's the fact that you are male contribute more to having a higher income. That is pretty obvious, and that perhaps has been validated multiple times. It seems that very interestingly, the educational level doesn't really factor that much into whether someone has a higher income or not. You can see that, the fact that if you're a high school grad, maybe that factors even a little bit more than maybe some college. And the fact that you can see that if you have a bachelor degree or not doesn't matter at all in from those features. That's a pretty interesting factor. That's a pretty interesting observation. It means that maybe college, contrary to the consensus in society, having a college degree or not, even in the 1994 areas, which is where this data was collected, is not as important as some of the other features that are involved here. So upon evaluation, we can observe that the most important feature is age, which is followed by hours of work and someone's marital status, especially being single. Having limited scope of the data set to only the private sector, it seems apparent that the seniority is still the most dominant feature in determining someone's income level. The second overarching theme is the amount of time spent on work, which can be represented directly by hours per week and indirectly by marital status. And like I said before, it seems that it's pretty interesting that educational attainment doesn't really weigh significantly in one's ability to make more than 50K. Now, of course, for this data set, we can only scheme so much from this data set, given the relatively small number of data points, as well as the fact that the result is more of a Boolean variable rather than an actual curve. The fact that it is the case that just lumping everybody who makes above $50K to a single group, it could be not as accurate. Even among those who make more than $50K, you can have those who make more than $1 million, and you can have those who make only maybe 60K or 70Ks. They apparently shouldn't be bucketed into the same group, but due to the nature of this data set, we can't really sift any further into some of those nitty-gritty details. So, but having said so, it still seems interesting that the age, if you look back, is still very much the dominant factor, which could mean that there are still a lot of the seniorities involved, which runs contrary to a pure meritocracy for a free market economy, which would indicate that you should put yourself out by the bootstrap. Those who make the most contribution should be able to get rewarded more. But it seems that here it's more likely the case that the older you are, maybe perhaps the longer you are in the industry, you're more likely to make more money. That doesn't really correlate 100% to your experiences as well as your capabilities. Yes, okay, that will be the presentation for this topic. Thank you very much for today.